Opening Christmas Eve 2008. Covina, California, a quiet suburb nestled in the San Gabriel Valley, just 22 miles east of Los Angeles. The kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names, where crime rates stayed low, and where the biggest excitement came from the annual Christmas parade downtown. Population 47,000. Modest homes, tree-lined streets, American flags on front porches. This was a community that believed in tradition, in family, in the sanctity of the holidays. And nowhere was that spirit more alive than at 1129 Knollcrest Drive, where Joseph and Alicia Ortega had created a haven of warmth and celebration that drew their entire family home every Christmas Eve. For as long as anyone could remember, the Ortegas had gathered together for their annual Christmas Eve celebration. It was a tradition woven into the fabric of their family identity. Parents, children, grandchildren, extended family, close friends. The house would fill with laughter, with the aroma of Alicia's pozole simmering on the stove, with the sounds of children running through hallways strung with lights, with the competitive banter of adults engaged in their traditional poker game. Christmas was Joseph and Alicia's favorite time of year. The lights, the music, the togetherness. With 5 adult children and numerous grandchildren, this was their moment. This was when the family they had built, the love they had nurtured, came home. But on December 24th, 2008, at approximately 11:30 in the evening, someone knocked on the door of the Ortega home. 8-year-old Katrina Yusufpolsky ran to answer it, as children do when they hear that special knock on Christmas Eve. And when she flung open the door and saw who stood there, she exclaimed with pure joy those 2 magical words every child loves to shout, "Santa Claus! Santa Claus!" Within seconds, a gunshot shattered the Christmas music. Katrina had been shot in the face by Santa Claus. What followed was one of the most horrific family massacres in American history. 9 people would die. An entire family line would be nearly erased. And the killer, dressed in that red suit with white fur trim, would transform the symbol of Christmas joy into something America would never quite see the same way again. This is the story of the Covina Christmas Massacre. This is the story of the Ortega family, of Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, of a divorce that ended in unimaginable violence, and of survivors who somehow found the strength to save Christmas itself from the ashes of that terrible night. Welcome to Lore to Mystery. Part 1. The Ortega family. To understand the full horror of what happened on December 24th, 2008, you first need to understand what was lost. You need to know the Ortega family not as victims on a crime report, but as people, as parents and children and siblings who built something beautiful together, as human beings with hopes and dreams and traditions that made them who they were. Joseph and Alicia Ortega. Joseph Ortega was 79 years old in 2008. Alicia Sotomayor Ortega was 70. They had been married for over 50 years, a testament to a love that had endured through generations, through challenges, through the raising of 5 children, and the welcoming of numerous grandchildren into their hearts and home. Joseph had come from Mexico originally, bringing with him the values of hard work, family loyalty, and the importance of keeping traditions alive. Alicia shared these values, and together they created a home that became the gravitational center of their family's universe. The house on Knollcrest Drive in Covina was more than just a residence. It was the family gathering place, the spot where memories were made, where holidays were celebrated, where grandchildren learned what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves. Neighbors described the Ortegas as pillars of their community, friendly, warm, always ready with a wave or a smile. Their home was well maintained, their lawn carefully tended, their Christmas decorations a neighborhood fixture every December. Mrs. Ortega was particularly known for her love of the holiday season. Every year, she would put out 4 white light-up reindeer decorations on the front lawn. These weren't expensive ornaments or elaborate displays, just simple reindeer that lit up the night. But they mattered to her. They were part of her Christmas tradition, part of how she welcomed the season and her family home. The 5 Ortega children, Joseph and Alicia raised 5 children who grew into adults with families of their own: James, Charles, Letitia, Alicia, and Sylvia. James Ortega was 52 years old in 2008. He was married to Teresa, age 52, and they had built a life together filled with the everyday joys and challenges that define a marriage. James was described by those who knew him as hardworking and dedicated to his family. Charles Ortega, age 50, was married to Sherry Lynn Ortega, age 45. They had children together, including a son named Joseph. Charles was known for his warm personality and his commitment to the family traditions his parents had established. He and Sherry were regular fixtures at the Christmas Eve celebrations, always present, always engaged, always part of the fabric of the family gathering. Letitia Ortega Józef-Polski was the youngest of the 5 siblings, the baby of the family. She was married and had 2 daughters, including 8-year-old Katrina. Letitia had grown up attending these Christmas Eve parties, had watched as the family grew and expanded, had participated in every poker game and every shared meal. She knew her mother's recipes by heart, even if she hadn't quite mastered Alicia's legendary pozole. That would come later, born of necessity and survival. Alicia Ortega. Ortiz was 46 years old. She shared her mother's name, carrying on that tradition of family connection that ran so deep in the Ortega household. Alicia was married and had children, including her 17-year-old son, Michael Andre Ortiz. And then there was Sylvia Ortega Pardo, age 43. Sylvia had lived a life marked by love, loss, and resilience. This was her 3rd marriage. She had 3 children from previous relationships, all of whom she loved and fought to provide for. She worked at Bodger Seeds La Tlaydidi, a flower breeding company in El Monte, where she served as a sales and marketing assistant. Her employer would later describe her as an excellent employee, very kind, always considerate of others. Sylvia's first husband had been killed in a car crash in Arizona, approximately 20 years before 2008, leaving her to raise their children alone. She had persevered, had continued building a life, had met and married again, and then, in 2004, she met Bruce Jeffrey Pardo. It seemed at first like a new beginning, a chance at happiness, a stable future. She could not have known that meeting Bruce Pardo would lead to the complete destruction of her family. The Christmas Eve tradition. The Ortega family Christmas Eve tradition was sacred. Every year, without fail, the family would gather at Joseph and Alicia's home on Knollcrest Drive. The house would transform into a hub of activity and warmth. Alicia would spend days preparing, cooking traditional dishes, making sure everything was perfect for her children and grandchildren. There was the food, of course, the pozole, a traditional Mexican soup that was Alicia's specialty, simmering for hours until it reached that perfect combination of flavors that only a mother's touch can achieve. There were tamales, perhaps, and other dishes that connected the family to their heritage and their history. There were the decorations, the Christmas tree lit up in the living room, ornaments collected over decades hanging from its branches, the lights strung inside and outside the house, the 4 white reindeer on the front lawn, glowing in the darkness, the wreaths, the garland, all the small touches that made the house feel like Christmas. There were the children, grandchildren running through the house, their excitement building as Christmas Day approached. Young voices calling out, playing games, getting into the kind of mischief that grandparents forgive instantly, because it comes wrapped in innocence and joy. And there were the adults, gathering in groups, catching up on the year that had passed, sharing stories and laughter, playing their traditional game of poker. 25 people, sometimes more, filling every room, creating that particular kind of chaos that only happens when a large, loving family comes together. The Ortega family even had a tradition within the tradition. For years, a neighbor had dressed up as Santa Claus and would visit the party, delighting the children and adding to the magical atmosphere of the evening. When that neighbor moved away, the tradition had paused, but the memory remained. The Ortega children still remembered those visits, still carried those images of Santa arriving at their Christmas Eve party. This tradition, this annual gathering, was the heartbeat of the Ortega family. It was what they looked forward to all year. It was what made them who they were. It was everything. And on December 24th, 2008, it became the setting for their massacre. Part 2. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo. To understand how Christmas Eve 2008 ended in mass murder, you need to understand Bruce Jeffrey Pardo. Not to excuse what he did, never that, but to understand how a man with no criminal record, no history of violence, a man described by nearly everyone who knew him as friendly and easygoing, could transform into someone capable of executing 9 people dressed as Santa Claus. Early life and background. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo was born on March 23, 1963 in Monterey Park, California. He grew up in the San Fernando Valley in what appeared to be a typical middle-class family. He attended John H. Francis Polytechnic High School in Sun Valley, Los Angeles, where he was remembered by classmates as a quiet, reserved young man who kept mostly to himself. One of those classmates was Carol Sanchez, who dated Pardo for 4 years when they were both 18 years old. Years later, after the massacre, she would struggle to reconcile the young man she had known with the killer who had destroyed an entire family. "I can't believe I'm seeing my old boyfriend on TV and all the people he destroyed," she said. "It's very heartbreaking. He was a very easygoing person, a very friendly guy. I would never in my right mind think that he would ever do anything like this." This was a common refrain from those who knew Bruce Pardo. He was easygoing, friendly, pleasant, not the type of person you would ever associate with violence or rage. He was the type of person who faded into the background, who didn't cause problems, who seemed, on the surface, perfectly normal. After high school, Pardo attended California State University, Northridge, where he pursued a degree in electrical engineering. According to those who knew him, he was a straight A student, dedicated to his studies, focused on building a successful career. Carol Sanchez remembered him as driven and academically gifted. Professional life. Bruce Pardo built a career in electrical engineering, working for various aerospace and technology companies over the years. According to his resume, which was later found by police, he had worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in La Cañada, Flintridge, from 1985 to 1994. JPL, managed by Caltech for NASA, is one of the most prestigious research and development centers in the world. Working there suggested Pardo had significant technical expertise and had achieved a level of professional success. Later, Pardo worked at Northrop Grumman for approximately 5 months in 2005. Then, from February 2005 to July 2008, he worked as an electrical engineer at ITT Corporation Electronic Systems Radar Systems in Van Nuys. This was his most recent and most stable position, where he was earning approximately $122,000 per year. It was a comfortable salary, the kind of income that suggested financial security and professional achievement. Pardo's resume claimed he held both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in electrical engineering. While police could not verify the complete authenticity of the resume after his death, multiple employers and colleagues confirmed he had the technical skills and knowledge consistent with advanced engineering education. By all outward appearances, Bruce Pardo was successful. He had a good job, a good income, and respect in his professional field. He was the kind of person who, on paper, had everything together, but beneath that surface there were cracks, hidden problems, secrets that would eventually contribute to the complete unraveling of his life. The hidden son. One of those secrets was Bruce Pardo's son. From a previous relationship with a woman named Elena Lucano, Pardo had fathered a child named Matthew. By 2008, Matthew was approximately 9 years old. But there was a tragic complication. Matthew was brain damaged, confined to a wheelchair, and required special care. Bruce Pardo had essentially abandoned his son. He had not seen Matthew for years, though he was apparently claiming the child as a dependent for tax purposes. He was not paying child support or providing any financial support to Elena Lucano for Matthew's care. He had simply walked away from his disabled child and the child's mother, pretending that part of his life did not exist. This abandonment would later play a crucial role in the dissolution of Pardo's second marriage. But in the years before he met Sylvia Ortega, Pardo kept this secret buried. He did not tell people about Matthew. He did not acknowledge his son's existence. He behaved as if he had no children at all. For a man who would later volunteer as an usher at the children's mass at his church, for a man who would develop a close relationship with his second wife's young daughter, this abandonment of his own disabled child reveals something dark at his core. It suggests a capacity for compartmentalization, for cutting off parts of his life that were inconvenient or challenging, for presenting a false face to the world, while hiding the truth of who he really was. The church volunteer. In Montrose, where Pardo lived, he was a familiar face at Holy Redeemer Catholic Church. He volunteered as an usher, particularly at the children's mass. He was seen as responsible, dependable, someone who showed up when he said he would. He was friendly with other parishioners, participated in church life, and seemed to embody the values of faith and community service. Friends at the church would later express shock at what Pardo did. They saw him as a good man, a man of faith, someone who would never harm anyone. Even on Christmas Eve 2008, Pardo had told a friend at the church that he planned to usher at the midnight mass. He gave every indication that this was just another Christmas, just another opportunity to serve his community and practice his faith. The fact that Pardo could maintain this image, could present himself as a man of God, while simultaneously planning mass murder, speaks to a profound disconnect between his public persona and his private reality. It suggests either a level of deception that bordered on sociopathy, or a catastrophic break with reality that allowed him to see no contradiction between his actions and his values. Meeting Sylvia Ortega. In 2004, Bruce Pardo met Sylvia Ortega. She was a single mother with 3 children from previous relationships, working hard to provide for her family. She was described by her employer as kind, considerate of others, an excellent employee. She had experienced loss and hardship, particularly the death of her first husband in a car accident, but she had persevered. She was looking for stability, for partnership, for love. Bruce Pardo seemed to offer all of that. He had a good job, a nice home, financial security. He was friendly, pleasant, seemingly stable. On January 29, 2006, after approximately 2 years of courtship, Bruce and Sylvia married. Sylvia brought to the marriage a young daughter from a previous relationship, approximately 5 years old at the time, along with 2 other children. She also brought almost all the furniture. What she didn't bring was much money. She was earning approximately $31,000 per year from her job at the flower breeding company in El Monte, far less than Pardo's 6-figure salary. The couple moved into a home that Pardo already owned in Montrose, about 15 miles north of Los Angeles. The house sat up the hill from Holy Redeemer Catholic Church. It was a nice home in a nice neighborhood, the kind of place where you could raise a family and feel safe. By all accounts, Bruce Pardo was close to Sylvia's young daughter. He seemed to embrace his role as stepfather. He included the children in his life. On the surface, they looked like a blended family making it work, navigating the challenges but finding happiness together. The couple began building a nest egg, with Pardo earning $122,000 per year and Sylvia contributing her $31,000. They managed to save $88,500 over approximately 2 years. That was a significant amount of money, the kind of savings that suggested financial responsibility and planning for the future. Pardo often puttered around the house or walked Saki, the couple's big brown Akita dog. Neighbors saw them together, saw what appeared to be a normal married life. There were no domestic disturbance calls to the Montrose house, no signs of abuse or violence, no red flags that would have warned anyone about what was coming. But underneath the surface of this apparently normal marriage, things were very wrong. Part 3. The marriage falls apart. The problems in the Pardo marriage began early and only intensified over time. What seemed like a promising union quickly devolved into conflict, resentment, and, ultimately, a bitter divorce that would set the stage for mass murder. The first cracks. The marriage began falling apart within the first year. According to court documents filed during the divorce proceedings, the fundamental issues centered on money and Pardo's refusal to fully integrate Sylvia and her children into his financial life. Bruce Pardo refused to open a joint bank account with Sylvia. This was not just a minor disagreement about how to manage household finances. It was a fundamental rejection of the kind of partnership that marriage is supposed to represent. Sylvia was his wife, but Pardo was unwilling to share his financial resources with her in the way that marriage typically requires. More troubling, Pardo expected Sylvia to use her own significantly smaller income to take care of her 3 children. While he earned $122,000 per year, Sylvia earned only $31,000. The idea that she should be solely responsible for her children's expenses while he maintained complete control over his much larger income was both unreasonable and cruel. It suggested a fundamental lack of generosity and partnership. Then there was the revelation about Matthew. At some point during the marriage, Sylvia discovered that Bruce had a disabled son from a previous relationship, whom he had essentially abandoned. Bruce had not told Sylvia about Matthew before they married. He had concealed this crucial part of his history, this child who existed and needed care. When Sylvia learned the truth, she was appalled. This was a man who had abandoned his disabled, wheelchair-bound son, who had refused to pay child support, who had simply erased that part of his life and pretended it didn't exist. What did that say about his character? What did that say about his capacity for commitment and responsibility? According to sources close to the police investigation, this revelation about Matthew was a major factor in Sylvia's decision to seek a divorce. She could not stay married to a man capable of abandoning his own disabled child. It violated everything she believed in, everything she valued. The deterioration. By December 2007, just under 2 years into the marriage, the situation had deteriorated completely. According to court papers, Sylvia was sleeping in another room. She was spending weekends at her parents' house on Knollcrest Drive, returning to the warmth and support of the Ortega family, seeking refuge from a marriage that had become unbearable. In February 2008, Sylvia told Bruce she wanted a divorce. She had reached the end. She could not continue living in a marriage defined by financial control, by secrecy, by a fundamental lack of partnership and respect. On March 24, 2008, Sylvia filed for divorce. What followed was a contentious, bitter legal battle that would last most of the year. Court documents from the proceedings paint a picture of a marriage that had descended into mutual hostility and recrimination, with both parties making claims about the other's behavior and demanding their fair share of the marital assets. The financial battle. The financial aspects of the divorce became particularly ugly. Sylvia filed court papers asking for attorney's fees and $3,166 in monthly spousal support. She made serious allegations about Pardo's handling of their joint savings. According to Sylvia's claims, Pardo had drawn down their savings from $88,500 to just $17,000 in only 2 months. She alleged he was transferring funds to a private account, essentially hiding marital assets from her and the court. The situation has become untenable, and continuing the marriage was not an option, she stated in court documents. These allegations suggested that Pardo, sensing the marriage was ending, was taking steps to ensure Sylvia would receive as little as possible in the divorce settlement. If true, it demonstrated a level of calculated malice, a determination to punish Sylvia financially for leaving him. In June 2008, the divorce court ordered Bruce Pardo to pay $1,785 per month in spousal support. The court also put him on a payment plan of $450 per month for $3,570 in past support that remained unpaid. These were not extraordinary amounts for someone earning $122,000 per year, but to Pardo they represented an intolerable burden and an unjust punishment. For his part, Pardo complained bitterly about Sylvia's lifestyle and spending. He filed court papers claiming that Sylvia was living with her parents, not paying rent, and had spent lavishly on various luxuries. According to Pardo, Sylvia had purchased a luxury car, gone on gambling trips to Las Vegas, enjoyed meals at fine restaurants, paid for massages, and taken golf lessons. He portrayed her as someone living an extravagant lifestyle while demanding support from him. Pardo also argued that the spousal support obligations were unfair, given the disparity between what each party had contributed to the marriage. He had brought the house, the higher income, the financial stability. Sylvia had brought 3 children and furniture. During the divorce proceedings, Pardo confided to a friend that his wife was taking him to the cleaners. This was a phrase that captured his sense of victimization, his belief that he was being unjustly punished in the divorce process. He saw himself not as someone who had failed in the marriage, not as someone whose controlling behavior and secret-keeping had destroyed the relationship, but as a victim of a system and an ex-wife determined to rob him of what was rightfully his. The job loss. Then, in July 2008, disaster struck. Bruce Pardo was fired from his job at ITT Corporation, Electronic Systems Radar Systems. The reason? Billing false hours. Pardo had been fraudulently billing clients for work he had not performed. This was not a layoff, not a downsizing, not a victim of economic circumstances. This was a firing for cause, for ethical violations, for fraud. For a man who had built his identity around being a successful electrical engineer. For someone who had bragged about his professional achievements and his 6-figure salary. This termination was devastating. It was also humiliating, and it meant that overnight, Pardo went from earning $122,000 per year to earning nothing. The timing could not have been worse. He was in the middle of a divorce, owing $1,085 per month in spousal support, with a mortgage payment of $2,700 per month on his Montrose home. He had credit card debt totaling $31,000. According to his own court filings, he had monthly expenses of $8,900 and was running a monthly deficit of $2,878. Suddenly, Pardo's carefully constructed life was collapsing. The job that had given him status and income was gone. The marriage that had provided companionship was ending. The financial security he had built was evaporating. And the legal system was demanding he continue paying support to an ex-wife he had come to resent and hate. Pardo begged the court for relief. I was not given a severance package from my last employer at termination, and I am not receiving any other income, he wrote in a court declaration. I am desperately seeking work and have since applied to many companies, resulting in several job interviews. I ask for support just until I gain employment. The court's response was mixed. Because Pardo had lost his job, the spousal support payments were suspended due to financial hardship. That was some relief. But the overall divorce settlement still required significant payments from Pardo. The final settlement. On December 18, 2008, just 6 days before Christmas, Bruce and Sylvia Pardo appeared in court to finalize their divorce. The settlement reached that day was, by all accounts, especially contentious and bitter. As part of the divorce agreement, several crucial decisions were made. Bruce Pardo was required to pay Sylvia $10,000 to finalize the divorce. This was not spousal support, but rather a lump sum payment. Sylvia was permitted to keep her wedding ring. This might seem like a small detail, but rings have both financial and emotional value. That Pardo contested this, that this became a point of negotiation, speaks to the level of hostility between them. Sylvia was permitted to keep Saki, the couple's beloved Akita dog. For Pardo, this was a particularly painful loss. He loved that dog. He had been the one who walked Saki in the park, who cared for the animal. Losing Saki felt like losing a family member, one more thing taken from him in this divorce. Bruce Pardo was permitted to keep the house in Montrose, but this was a mixed blessing. The property was valued at more than $500,000, but they only had $106,000 in equity. Pardo still owed the bulk of the mortgage, with monthly payments of $2,700. Without a job, those payments were impossible to maintain. The divorce settlement included the standard language that appears in many such proceedings. No counseling or delay could help restore this marriage. There are irreconcilable differences which have led to the complete breakdown of the marriage. According to Pardo's attorney, Stanley Silver, Pardo seemed at peace with the settlement when they spoke a day or two before the massacre. Pardo was happy that it was all behind him, Silver told reporters. He was ready to move forward with his life, and excited about looking for a new job as a computer engineer. All of my dealings with him were always pleasant and cheerful. But if Pardo seemed happy to his attorney, something else was happening beneath the surface. Something dark and violent was taking shape in his mind, a plan that would ensure Sylvia and her family paid the ultimate price for the crime of divorcing him. The resentment and rage. To understand why Bruce Pardo did what he did on December 24, 2008, you need to understand the psychology of a certain type of killer. Pardo exhibited classic signs of extreme narcissism and obsessive-compulsive disorder, according to an FBI profile completed after the massacre. For someone like Pardo, the divorce could have represented not just the end of a marriage, but a complete personal failure and humiliation. He had lost his wife, his stepchildren, his dog, his job, his financial security, and his sense of self-worth. Everything that had defined him as a successful man had been stripped away. Based on the FBI profile and his actions, in Pardo's mind, this was likely not his fault. He had not failed. He had not made mistakes. He had not driven his wife away through controlling behavior and secret keeping. No. In Pardo's mind, he was the victim. Sylvia was the villain. The legal system was unjust. Everyone was against him. One reporter who covered the case summarized Pardo's mindset this way: "This divorce shattered Bruce Pardo. It became his obsession, and Bruce began to plot ways to get back at Sylvia. I think that he decided that he wasn't just going to kill her, but he was going to kill everything that she loved and take it, wipe it off the face of the earth." That phrase captures the essence of Pardo's plan. He didn't just want to kill Sylvia, he wanted to destroy everything she valued. He wanted to erase her entire family, to take from her what he perceived she had taken from him. This was not a crime of passion, not a spur-of-the-moment act of violence. This was calculated, planned, methodical revenge. And for that plan, Bruce Pardo would need weapons, supplies, and a disguise that would let him get close to his targets before they realized what was happening. He would need a Santa Claus costume. Part 4. The planning. The massacre that occurred on December 24, 2008, was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was meticulously planned over weeks or possibly months. The level of preparation, the acquisition of weapons, the construction of homemade devices, and the development of an escape plan all indicate that Bruce Pardo had been thinking about this attack for a considerable period of time. The weapons. In the days and weeks leading up to Christmas Eve, Bruce Pardo acquired an arsenal of weapons. According to police who later searched his Montrose home, they found 5 empty boxes for semi-automatic handguns. This meant Pardo had purchased at least 5 handguns, all within a relatively short period of time. The weapons Pardo ultimately brought to the Ortega home were 4 9mm Sig Sauer handguns, all semi-automatic. These were serious weapons designed for military and law enforcement use, reliable and deadly. Pardo also had 2 shotguns at his home, though he did not bring these to the massacre. For someone with no criminal record and no history of violence, Pardo should have been able to purchase these weapons legally. California has gun laws, certainly, but they are not absolute barriers to someone determined to arm themselves, particularly if that person has never been arrested or convicted of a crime. The question that haunts investigators is, did anyone notice that Pardo was buying multiple handguns in a short period? Did any gun dealer think it was unusual that this electrical engineer with no apparent interest in firearms was suddenly purchasing an arsenal? If anyone did notice, they did not report it, and Pardo continued acquiring the weapons he would need for his plan. The flamethrower. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Pardo's planning was the construction of a homemade flamethrower. This was not something he could purchase at a store. This was something he had to build himself, using his engineering expertise to create a weapon of mass destruction. The device was ingenious in its simplicity and horrifying in its purpose. Pardo started with a rolling air compressor, the kind of tool that might be found in any garage or workshop. He removed the actual compressor mechanism and modified it to create a pressurized device that could spray liquid fuel. The fuel Pardo chose was high-octane racing fuel, the kind used in performance vehicles. This fuel burns hotter and faster than regular gasoline, making it ideal for creating a fast-spreading, intense fire. Pardo managed to load approximately 18 gallons of this racing fuel into his device, an enormous amount that would be more than sufficient to engulf an entire house in flames. The compressor device was designed to spray the fuel in a mist or spray pattern, maximizing coverage and ensuring the fire would spread rapidly. Pardo apparently intended to use a flare to ignite the fuel once it had been sprayed throughout the Ortega home. This would allow him to control the timing of the ignition and potentially escape before the fire began. To conceal this deadly device, Pardo gift-wrapped it. He made it look like a large Christmas present, something that would not seem out of place at a Christmas Eve party. The wrapping was good enough that no one would question it, at least not until Pardo was ready to reveal what was inside. This construction of the flamethrower demonstrates several things about Pardo's state of mind. First, it shows his engineering skills and his ability to think through complex technical problems. Second, it shows the depth of his planning and the amount of time he must have spent preparing for this attack. Third, and most chillingly, it shows his intention to not just kill his targets, but to burn them, to destroy them so completely that they would be unrecognizable, to erase them from existence in the most brutal way possible. The escape plan. Bruce Pardo did not plan to die on December 24, 2008. He planned to commit mass murder and then escape, fleeing the country before authorities could apprehend him. The elaborate escape plan he developed shows that he believed he could get away with this crime. Pardo rented multiple vehicles in the days before Christmas Eve. One of these was a 2008 Dodge Caliber, the car he would ultimately drive to the Ortega home. But Pardo also parked another rental vehicle near the house of Sylvia's divorce attorney. This vehicle was stocked with supplies, maps of the Southwest and Mexico, and other items that would support extended travel. The fact that Pardo had identified Sylvia's divorce attorney as a potential target is significant. It suggests his rage extended beyond Sylvia and her family to anyone he perceived as having wronged him in the divorce process. Police believe the attorney might have been Pardo's next target if the initial attack had gone according to plan. Pardo also purchased a plane ticket for a Christmas Day morning flight from Los Angeles International Airport to Moline, Illinois. The destination is interesting. Pardo had told a friend he planned to visit Iowa around the holidays. This might have been part of his cover story, a way to establish an alibi or to explain his absence if anyone asked where he had gone after Christmas. But the real destination Pardo had in mind appears to have been Canada. When police later found his body, he had $17,000 in cash, saran-wrapped to his legs, and concealed inside a girdle he was wearing. This was serious money, the kind of cash you would need to establish yourself in a new country while avoiding detection. The amount suggests Pardo had been stockpiling money for some time, perhaps withdrawing cash from accounts or liquidating assets in preparation for his escape. Police believe Pardo intended to fly to Canada and then disappear, possibly using the cash to establish a new identity or to travel even farther from the United States. The $17,000 would have provided a cushion while he figured out his next steps. Covina Police Chief Kim Rainey summarized Pardo's intentions this way. All indications are that he intended to commit this crime and then flee the country. What it appears is that he didn't anticipate injuring himself to the point where, obviously, he took his own life. This was a crucial point. Pardo's suicide was not part of his original plan. He wanted to survive, he wanted to escape, he wanted to get away with mass murder and start a new life somewhere else. The only reason he killed himself was because his plan went catastrophically wrong and he was too badly injured to continue. The costume. The final element of Pardo's plan was the Santa Claus costume. This was both practical and deeply symbolic. On a practical level, the costume served as a disguise. Santa Claus is supposed to be jolly, friendly, benevolent. A man dressed as Santa at a Christmas Eve party would not immediately be perceived as a threat. The costume would allow Pardo to get close to his victims, to knock on the door and be welcomed in, before anyone realized what was happening. The Ortega family even had a history with Santa visits. For years, a neighbor had dressed up as Santa and visited their Christmas Eve party, creating magical moments for the children and adding to the festive atmosphere. That neighbor had moved away, but the family remembered those visits. They remembered the joy of Santa's arrival. This meant that when Pardo showed up dressed as Santa, the natural assumption would be that someone was reviving this beloved tradition, that this was a surprise gift from a friend or family member who wanted to bring back that special magic. 8-year-old Katrina's reaction when she opened the door, "Santa Claus, Santa Claus," shows how completely the costume worked. She was not afraid. She was excited. She thought this was a wonderful surprise, a special moment on Christmas Eve. But on a symbolic level, the choice of a Santa costume reveals something even darker about Pardo's psychology. Santa Claus is the embodiment of Christmas joy, of gift-giving, of childhood innocence. He represents everything good about the holiday season. By choosing to dress as Santa while committing mass murder, Pardo was perverting that symbol, taking something beloved and using it as a vehicle for death and destruction. Some psychologists who have analyzed the case suggest that Pardo's choice of costume reflected his desire to not just kill his victims, but to destroy their joy, to take from them the thing they loved most, to ensure that Christmas and the symbol of Santa Claus would forever be associated with horror and trauma for the survivors. Others suggest that Pardo may have seen himself as a dark version of Santa, delivering not gifts, but punishment to those he believed had wronged him. In his twisted logic, he was playing the role of judge and executioner, determining who had been naughty and delivering his own form of justice. Whatever his reasoning, the Santa costume ensured that Pardo's crime would be remembered not just as another mass shooting, but as something uniquely horrific, a violation of the most sacred and joyful time of year, a transformation of a symbol of love into an instrument of death. The psychological state. In the days leading up to December 24, 2008, Bruce Pardo gave no outward sign that he was planning mass murder. His attorney, Stanley Silver, spoke with him a day or two before Christmas and found him pleasant and optimistic, excited about finding a new job and moving on with his life. Pardo told a friend at his church that he planned to usher at the Christmas Eve midnight mass. He told another friend he was planning to visit Iowa around the holidays. These interactions suggest either incredible self-control and deception, or a complete disconnect between Pardo's planning and his understanding of what he was actually doing. It is possible that Pardo had compartmentalized his life so completely that he could talk about church services and job hunting while simultaneously preparing weapons and homemade explosives for a family massacre. The autopsy performed after Pardo's death revealed that he had cocaine in his system at the time of the attack and his death. This raises questions about whether drug use played a role in the massacre. Was Pardo using cocaine regularly, and did this affect his judgment and impulse control? Or did he use cocaine specifically on December 24th to give himself courage for what he was about to do, to quiet his conscience, to push himself past the psychological barrier that normally prevents people from committing such acts? We will never know for certain what was going through Bruce Pardo's mind in those final days. We know he was angry, resentful, obsessed with the divorce and what he perceived as injustices done to him. We know he felt victimized and believed that Sylvia and her family deserved punishment. We know he spent weeks or months planning this attack, acquiring weapons, building a flamethrower, developing an escape plan. But we cannot fully understand the internal process by which a man with no history of violence, a man who volunteered at church and was described as friendly by everyone who knew him, could decide to shoot children, to burn people alive, to commit an act of evil so profound that it would shock a nation. All we know is that on December 24, 2008, at approximately 11:30 in the evening, Bruce Jeffrey Pardo put on a Santa Claus costume, loaded his weapons into his rental car, and drove to 1129 Knollcrest Drive in Covina, California, where the Ortega family was celebrating Christmas Eve. And what happened next would be one of the worst family massacres in American history. Part 5. December 24th, 2008. The party Christmas Eve 2008 at the Ortega home was proceeding exactly as it had for years. The house was full of life, laughter, and love. Approximately 25 people filled the rooms of the home on Knollcrest Drive, creating that wonderful chaos that only happens when a large family gathers together. The decorations were up, the Christmas tree twinkled in the living room, the 4 white reindeer on the front lawn glowed in the darkness, welcoming anyone who drove past. Inside, the house smelled of food, of Alicia's cooking, of Christmas. The children were running around, high on excitement and sugar, counting down the hours until Christmas morning. The adults were engaged in their traditional poker game, cards and chips spread across a table, friendly competition and banter filling the air. Joseph and Alicia Ortega, the patriarch and matriarch of the family, moved through their home with the satisfaction of parents who have raised a good family and created a strong tradition. This was what they had built over 50 years of marriage. This gathering, this tradition, this outpouring of love and togetherness. All 5 of their children were present. James and his wife Teresa, Charles and his wife Cherry Lynn, Letitia with her family, including 8-year-old Katrina, Alicia Ortiz, and her family, including 17-year-old Michael, and Sylvia with her children. The party was winding down slightly by 11:30 p.m. Some of the youngest children were getting tired. Adults were thinking about the drive home, about getting their families settled for the night so Santa could come. But there was still energy in the house, still joy, still the warmth of being together. And then someone knocked on the door. 11:30 p.m., the knock. 8-year-old Katrina Yusufpolsky, Letitia's daughter, was probably the fastest person to react to the knock. Children are like that on Christmas Eve, always alert for any sign of magic or surprise. She ran to the front door and flung it open. Standing on the doorstep was Santa Claus, red suit with white fur trim, black boots, full beard, hat. He was carrying what appeared to be a large gift-wrapped present. Katrina's face must have lit up with pure joy. She exclaimed loudly enough for others in the house to hear, "Santa Claus! Santa Claus!" For one perfect moment, this must have seemed like a wonderful surprise. Someone had arranged for Santa to visit the party, reviving the old tradition. The children would be thrilled. This would be a memory they talked about for years. Then, Bruce Pardo pulled out a 9mm Sig Sauer handgun and shot Katrina in the face. The bullet entered below her lower lip and tore through her jaw. The force of the shot knocked the little girl backward. Blood sprayed. The sound of the gunshot shattered the Christmas music and the laughter. For a split second, no one inside the house could process what had just happened. This couldn't be real. This had to be a mistake, an accident, something other than what it appeared to be. But Bruce Pardo didn't stop. He stepped through the doorway into the Ortega home and began firing. The shooting. What followed was chaos, terror, and death. Pardo opened fire indiscriminately at the people inside the home. He had 4 handguns with him, each loaded with multiple rounds. As he emptied one gun, he would drop it and pull out another. He was shooting at everyone he could see, not distinguishing between men and women, between young and old, between anyone. People screamed. Some tried to run deeper into the house, looking for rooms to hide in, for furniture to hide behind. Others tried to escape by any means possible, breaking windows, crawling under tables, doing anything to get away from the man with the gun. Charles Ortega and James Ortega, Sylvia's brothers, showed incredible courage in those moments. Even after being shot and wounded, both men got up and tried to subdue the gunman. They fought back, trying to protect their family, trying to stop Pardo before he could kill everyone in the house. But Pardo was methodical. He was focused. He had come here to kill, and he would not be stopped. According to police who later reconstructed the crime scene, Pardo stood over some of his victims and shot them execution style, ensuring they were dead. A 16-year-old girl was shot in the back as she tried to flee. The bullet struck her but did not kill her. She would survive, but she would carry the memory of that moment with her forever. Another young woman, trying to escape the carnage, jumped from a second-story window. She landed hard enough to break or sprain her ankle, but the injury was preferable to staying in that house with the gunman. Others managed to escape through broken windows, through doors, scrambling over furniture and running into the night. Some ran to neighbors' houses, pounding on doors, screaming for help, begging them to call 911. Inside the house, Bruce Pardo continued firing until he had emptied all 4 of his handguns. Multiple victims lay on the floor, blood pooling around them, some dead, some dying, some wounded but conscious and terrified. And then, Pardo turned his attention to the gift-wrapped package he had brought with him. The fire Pardo unwrapped the package, revealing the homemade flamethrower he had constructed. This was the device that would ensure complete destruction, that would burn away the evidence, that would make it difficult to identify the victims. Pardo activated the device and began spraying racing fuel throughout the first floor of the home. The mist of high-octane fuel spread quickly, coating walls, furniture, curtains, everything it touched. 18 gallons of racing fuel, atomized and dispersed throughout multiple rooms. Pardo's plan, according to police investigators, was to use a flare to ignite the fuel once he had finished spraying it. This would have allowed him to control the timing, to ensure he was clear of the house before the fire started, to maximize his chances of escape. But Pardo had made a critical miscalculation. There was an open flame somewhere inside the house. Perhaps a candle, perhaps a pilot light on the stove. Perhaps Christmas lights that had overheated. The exact source was never determined. What is certain is that when the atomized racing fuel reached that open flame, the result was instantaneous and catastrophic. The fuel ignited in an explosion that sent flames roaring through the first floor of the house. The explosion was powerful enough that neighbors reported hearing it and seeing the flash of light. Bruce Pardo, still inside the house and still spraying fuel, was caught in the explosion. The flames engulfed him, and the Santa Claus costume he was wearing began to melt onto his body. He suffered third-degree burns on both arms and both legs. The synthetic material of the costume liquefied in the intense heat and fused with his skin. The pain must have been unimaginable. Pardo staggered out of the house, partially on fire, the Santa costume still clinging to him. He had planned for many contingencies, but he had not planned for this. He had not anticipated being injured in the fire he himself had set. The escape. Despite the horrific burns, Pardo managed to get to his rental car, the 2008 Dodge Caliber he had parked nearby. He stripped off the burning Santa costume, though parts of it remained melted to his skin. He got into the car and drove away from the scene, leaving behind the burning house and the dying and dead members of the Ortega family. Behind him, the fire consumed the house. The flames spread rapidly, fed by the racing fuel, climbing from the first floor to the second. The heat was so intense that it would make victim identification nearly impossible. Bodies were burned beyond recognition. The house itself would be nearly completely destroyed. As Pardo drove away, neighbors were calling 911. The first calls came in around 11:30 p.m., immediately after the shooting started. People reported hearing gunshots, seeing fire, hearing screams. The Covina Police Department and the Los Angeles County Fire Department were dispatched to the scene. The 911 calls. The 911 calls from that night are harrowing to listen to. The Covina Police Department later released an 11-minute call that captured the immediate aftermath of the attack. The caller was Letitia Józef-Polsky, Katrina's mother, calling from a neighbor's house where she had fled with her wounded daughter. Her voice was frantic, traumatized, barely able to form coherent sentences. She described how a man dressed as Santa Claus had knocked on the door, how Katrina had answered, how the man had immediately shot her daughter in the face. She described the chaos, the shooting, the fire. She identified the shooter, despite the Santa costume and beard, as Bruce Pardo, her sister Sylvia's ex-husband. Other 911 calls came from neighbors who were watching the house burn, who were hearing the gunshots, who were witnessing something so horrific that they could barely believe it was real. One neighbor's call was particularly poignant. "Come immediately, they're burning down someone's house." The 911 operators did their best to gather information, to dispatch help, to provide instructions to the callers. But this was beyond anything they had trained for, beyond anything the small city of Covina had ever experienced. The response. Covina police officers arrived on the scene within minutes of the first 911 call, but by then it was already too late to save most of the victims. The house was engulfed in flames. People were still hearing gunshots, though it was unclear whether these were additional shots from Pardo or ammunition exploding in the fire. Police immediately secured the perimeter and began assessing the situation. They found survivors emerging from the house or hiding in neighbors' homes. They found Katrina with the gunshot wound to her face. They found the 16-year-old girl who had been shot in the back. They found the young woman who had broken her ankle jumping from the second-story window. Firefighters from the Los Angeles County Fire Department were held back initially because police were not sure if the shooter was still in the area. The last thing anyone wanted was for firefighters to be shot while trying to fight the fire. Once the area was secured, firefighters moved in to battle the blaze. But the fire was intense, fed by the racing fuel, and the house was already largely consumed. Firefighters did their best to control the blaze and prevent it from spreading to neighboring homes. By approximately 1:30 a.m. on Christmas Day, they had extinguished the fire. What remained was a charred ruin. The two-story house had been reduced to a blackened skeleton. The roof had collapsed. The walls were barely standing. And inside, in the ashes and debris, were bodies. Bodies burned so badly that they were unrecognizable as human beings. Police began the grim work of securing the crime scene and searching for victims. They found bodies in the living room where people had been shot before the fire started. They found bodies in other parts of the house where people had been trapped by the flames. The bodies were severely burned and charred, making immediate identification impossible. Initially, police confirmed 3 deaths. Then, as they continued searching through the wreckage, they found more bodies, and more. By Christmas Day, they had recovered 9 bodies from the ruins of the Ortega home. The survivors. Not everyone at the party died. 16 people survived by various means, hiding under furniture, escaping through windows, jumping from the second story, running out of the house before the fire spread. 3 people were injured in the attack. 8-year-old Katrina Yusufpolsky, shot in the face, survived, and was taken to Los Angeles County USC Medical Center. The bullet had caused severe damage to her jaw and cheek, but miraculously, she survived the surgery and was released from the hospital the next day. The wound would heal, but the scar would remain a permanent reminder of the night Santa Claus shot her. The 16-year-old girl who was shot in the back also survived. Her injuries were serious, but not life-threatening. She would recover physically, though the psychological trauma would last far longer. The young woman who jumped from the second-story window had a broken ankle, but otherwise survived unharmed. Letitia Yusufpolsky, who had called 911, survived along with her family. She had lost both her parents, all 4 of her siblings, 2 sisters-in-law, and a nephew. But she and her children had escaped the massacre. The survivors would carry guilt and trauma for years to come. They would ask themselves why they survived when others died. They would relive those moments of terror over and over. They would struggle with anniversaries, with Christmas itself, with the sound of knocking on a door, with anything that reminded them of what they had experienced. But they were alive, and eventually, they would have to figure out how to keep living in a world where this thing had happened. The victims. The bodies found in the wreckage of the Ortega home were so badly burned that immediate identification was impossible. The intense heat of the fire, fueled by 18 gallons of racing fuel, had charred the remains beyond recognition. Dental records, medical records, and X-rays would be needed to establish identities. Ed Winter, assistant chief of the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, told reporters that the recovered bodies were severely burned and charred, and that the intense fire had caused the top floor of the 2-story house to collapse onto the first floor. Determining cause of death would be challenging. Did the victims die from gunshot wounds, or did they die in the fire? In many cases, the answer would never be definitively determined. But eventually, over the days following Christmas, the identities of the 9 victims were confirmed. Sylvia Ortega Pardo, age 43, the ex-wife, the target of Pardo's rage, a mother, a daughter, a sister, An excellent employee who was kind and considerate of others. Joseph S. Ortega, 79, the patriarch. A man who had built a family and a tradition, who had emigrated from Mexico and created a life of dignity and love. A father and grandfather taken on the night when his family should have been celebrating together. Alicia Sotomayor Ortega, age 70. The matriarch. A mother who loved Christmas, who cooked for her family, who put out those 4 white reindeer every year. A woman whose recipe for pozole her surviving daughter would have to learn by trial and error because Alicia was not there to teach her anymore. James Ortega, age 52. Sylvia's brother. A man who died trying to protect his family, who fought back even after being wounded. A husband to Teresa. Teresa Ortega, age 52. James's wife. A mother, a wife, a member of the family who had been welcomed into the Ortega clan through marriage. Charles Ortega, age 50. Sylvia's brother. Another man who fought back, who tried to subdue the gunman even after being shot. A husband to Sherry Lynn, a father to Joseph. Sherry Lynn Ortega, age 45. Charles's wife. A mother who died at a Christmas party, killed by her sister-in-law's ex-husband. Alicia Ortega Ortiz, age 46. Sylvia's sister. A woman who shared her mother's name and who was taken along with the rest of her family. Michael Andre Ortiz, age 17. Alicia's son. A teenager with his whole life ahead of him. Killed on Christmas Eve for no reason other than being related to Sylvia Pardo. 9 people. An entire generation of the Ortega family nearly wiped out. Parents and children, siblings and spouses. People who had gathered to celebrate Christmas, who had expected nothing but joy and togetherness, who had no warning that death was about to knock on their door, dressed as Santa Claus. The massacre left 13 children without at least one parent. Some lost both parents that night. The ripple effects of Pardo's crime would extend far beyond the 9 people who died, affecting the entire extended family, the entire community, everyone who knew and loved the Ortegas. The search for the shooter. As investigators worked the crime scene on Knollcrest Drive, they knew who they were looking for. Letitia had identified Bruce Pardo as the shooter. Witnesses had described seeing a car leaving the cul-de-sac shortly after the shooting. An APB was issued for Pardo's vehicle. But where had Pardo gone? Was he heading for the airport to catch his flight to Illinois? Was he going to the home of Sylvia's divorce attorney to carry out the second part of his plan? Was he fleeing to Mexico with his $17,000 in cash? The answer came early on Christmas Day morning, but from an unexpected location and under unexpected circumstances. Part 6. The Aftermath. Sylmar, Christmas morning. At approximately 3:30 a.m. on Christmas Day, December 25, 2008, Brad Pardo returned to his home in Sylmar from a Christmas Eve party. Sylmar is a neighborhood in the San Fernando Valley region of Los Angeles, about 25 miles from Covina. When Brad entered his home, he found his brother Bruce lying dead in a pool of blood. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo had shot himself in the head with one of his 9mm handguns. A single bullet to the mouth. The gun was still in his lap. There was another 9mm handgun on the floor nearby, and a bullet hole in the ceiling, suggesting there might have been a second shot, or that Pardo had tested the weapon before using it on himself. Brad immediately called the police. When Sylmar police investigators arrived at the scene, they initially thought there might be a second shooter, or that something more complicated had occurred. But as they examined the scene and began to learn about Bruce Pardo's background, they started to piece together what had happened. A check of Bruce Pardo's personal information revealed that he had an ex-wife named Sylvia Ortiz, whose maiden name was Ortega. Ortega, the same name as the family being massacred in Covina at almost the exact time Brad was discovering his brother's body. Police from Covina and Sylmar began coordinating. They confirmed that Bruce Pardo was the suspect in the Covina massacre and that he had killed himself rather than be captured. They searched his brother's house and the vehicle Pardo had driven there, the 2008 Dodge Caliber. Inside the car, they found the Santa Claus costume, or what remained of it after parts of it had melted onto Pardo's body. They found thousands of rounds of ammunition. They found $17,000 in cash that Pardo had wrapped in plastic and concealed on his body. They found evidence of his escape plan, his tickets, his supplies, and they found something else. The car had been booby-trapped. Pardo had rigged the vehicle so that moving the Santa costume would trigger an explosion. The booby trap was designed to kill police officers or investigators who searched the car, one final act of violence from beyond the grave. Police called in the bomb squad. As they were examining the vehicle, it exploded. The booby trap detonated, sending flames and debris into the air. Fortunately, no one was injured in the explosion, but it was a close call. The autopsy performed on Bruce Pardo revealed several important findings. He had suffered horrific third-degree burns on both arms and both legs. Parts of the Santa costume had melted and fused with his skin. He had cocaine in his system at the time of death, and he had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the mouth. The physical evidence confirmed what investigators had already suspected. Bruce Pardo had not planned to kill himself. He had planned to escape, to flee the country, to get away with mass murder. The only reason he committed suicide was because the explosion and fire had left him so badly burned that continuing with his escape plan was impossible. He killed himself out of desperation, pain, and the realization that his plan had failed. Covina Police Chief Kim Rainey summarized it succinctly. What it appears is that he didn't anticipate injuring himself to the point where, obviously, he took his own life. The investigation. In the days following the massacre, investigators worked to reconstruct what had happened and to understand Bruce Pardo's motivations and planning. They searched Pardo's home in Montrose and found a virtual bomb-making factory. There were 5 empty boxes for semi-automatic handguns, indicating Pardo had purchased multiple weapons specifically for the attack. There were 2 shotguns. There were containers for high-octane racing fuel. There were tools and materials consistent with the construction of the flamethrower device. They found Pardo's resume, which claimed bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering, and detailed his employment history. They found financial documents related to his divorce. They found evidence of his planning, his preparation, his obsession with revenge against Sylvia and her family. The investigation confirmed that Pardo had no previous criminal record. He had never been arrested for domestic violence or any other crime. There had been no restraining orders between him and Sylvia. By all legal standards, he was a law-abiding citizen with no red flags in his background. Investigators interviewed people who knew Pardo, trying to understand how someone with no history of violence could commit such an act. The responses were consistently similar. Pardo was described as friendly, pleasant, easygoing. No one saw this coming. No one had any indication that Pardo was capable of such violence. His attorney, Stanley Silver, had spoken with Pardo just days before the massacre and found him optimistic and forward-looking. His friends at church expected him to usher at the Christmas Eve midnight mass. His high school girlfriend, Carol Sanchez, expressed shock and disbelief that the young man she had dated could grow up to become a mass murderer. The FBI was called in to develop a psychological profile of Pardo. Their analysis suggested he suffered from extreme narcissism and obsessive-compulsive disorder. The narcissism would explain his inability to see any fault in his own behavior, his belief that he was the victim in the divorce, his rage at being rejected and abandoned. The obsessive-compulsive disorder would explain the meticulous planning, the attention to detail in constructing the flamethrower, and developing the escape plan. But ultimately, the FBI profile could only offer theories. Bruce Pardo took the full truth of his motivations with him when he pulled the trigger in his brother's home. The community responds. The city of Covina was devastated by the massacre. This was a quiet, low-crime community where people knew each other, where families felt safe, where Christmas was celebrated with joy and innocence. The idea that someone could dress as Santa Claus and commit mass murder at a family Christmas party was beyond comprehension. Lieutenant Pat Buchanan of the Covina Police Department, a 30-year veteran, told reporters, "I've been with the department for 30 years and I've never seen anything like this." Police Chief Kim Rainey described the scene as apocalyptic. Neighbors of the Ortega family gathered in shock and grief. They remembered the family's annual Christmas parties, the sounds of laughter and music coming from the house, the 4 white reindeer that Mrs. Ortega put out every year. They struggled to understand how something so evil could happen in their neighborhood, on their street, to people they knew. David Ritchie, a neighbor, captured the sense of violation. The fact that he showed up at the party with a Santa outfit puts a sick twist on it. It's such a tragedy. The broader Covina community rallied to support the survivors. Mental health professionals were brought in to provide counseling to the family, to neighbors, to first responders who had witnessed the aftermath. The small police department, which had never handled anything of this magnitude, worked to process the trauma while also conducting a thorough investigation. Mayor Pro Tem Walt Allen III acknowledged the widespread impact. There is feeling of total helplessness. It has emotionally affected a lot of people in Covina. The national reaction, news of the Covina Christmas Massacre spread rapidly across the United States and internationally. The details were so shocking, so uniquely horrible, that media outlets gave the story extensive coverage. A man dressed as Santa Claus, a family Christmas party, 9 people dead, including a 17-year-old boy and elderly parents, a homemade flamethrower, children shot, a house burned to the ground. It was the kind of story that seemed almost too terrible to be true. The massacre occurred during the Christmas season, when news outlets were typically covering feel-good holiday stories. The contrast between the expected joy of Christmas and the horror of what had happened in Covina created a profound sense of cognitive dissonance. Christmas was supposed to be safe. Families were supposed to be sacred. Santa Claus was supposed to bring joy, not death. The story prompted discussions about domestic violence, about the dangers of bitter divorces, about gun control, about how to identify and help people before they commit acts of mass violence. But none of these discussions could change what had happened or bring back the 9 people who died. The victims are laid to rest in the days following Christmas. The bodies of the 9 victims were identified through dental records and medical records. Funeral arrangements were made. The Ortega family, or what remained of it, prepared to say goodbye to Joseph and Alicia, to James and Teresa, to Charles and Sherry Lynn, to Alicia Ortiz, to Michael, and to Sylvia. The funerals were heartbreaking. Leticia Józef-Polski, now the sole surviving child of Joseph and Alicia Ortega, had to bury her entire immediate family: parents, brothers, sisters, sister-in-law, brother-in-law, nephew. In a matter of minutes on Christmas Eve, she had lost nearly everyone she had looked up to, nearly everyone who had defined her family identity. The 13 children who were orphaned by the massacre faced uncertain futures. Some had lost both parents, others had lost one parent, and would now be raised by the surviving parent. Family members and attorneys worked to determine guardianship arrangements, to figure out how to care for all these children who had lost so much. The broader extended family and community came together to support the survivors financially and emotionally, but no amount of support could fill the void left by the 9 people who had been taken. The property. The house at 1129 Knollcrest Drive was a total loss. The fire had destroyed nearly everything. What remained was a blackened shell, a crime scene, a place of death that would never again be a home. In the weeks and months following the massacre, the property was fenced off and marked with no trespassing signs. The lawn became littered with these signs, keeping away the morbidly curious who wanted to see the site of such a notorious crime. But the neighbors didn't want the property to be defined solely by what had happened there. Teresa Guinez, who had lived next to the Ortegas for 10 years, salvaged the 4 white reindeer decorations from the ruins. She and her family repaired them, making new ears out of coat hangers and replacing the lights. They placed the reindeer back on the lawn as a memorial to Mrs. Ortega, who had loved those decorations and had put them out every Christmas. It was Mrs. Ortega's favorite holiday, and she would put those out every year, Ginez explained. It was a small gesture, but it meant something. It was a way of saying that the Ortegas had been real people with traditions and joy, not just victims of a massacre. A handmade cross with floral designs and the words "Rest in Peace" was hung near the center of the green fence surrounding the property. People left flowers, candles, cards. The site became an informal memorial, a place for people to pay their respects and try to make sense of the senseless. Eventually, the property would be sold and rebuilt. But for the people of Covina, 1129 Knollcrest Drive would always be marked by what happened there on Christmas Eve 2008. Part 7. The Survivors. Letitia, Józef Polski. The reluctant matriarch Letitia. Ortega. Józef Polski was the youngest of the 5 Ortega siblings. On December 24, 2008, she lost her parents, her 2 brothers, her 2 sisters, 2 sisters-in-law, and a teenage nephew. In a matter of minutes, her entire immediate family was taken from her. She survived along with her husband and her 2 daughters, including Katrina, who had been shot in the face by Bruce Pardo. But survival meant taking on responsibilities she had never imagined and dealing with grief that seemed incomprehensible. Letitia became, by default, the matriarch of what remained of the Ortega family. She was now the oldest surviving member of her generation. The 13 children who had been orphaned looked to her for guidance, for stability, for some sense that family still existed even after such devastating loss. One of her first challenges was practical. Her sister's youngest daughter needed a home. Letitia and her husband took the girl in, adding to their own family. They would raise this niece alongside their own daughters, ensuring she grew up knowing she was loved and valued, despite the tragedy that had taken her mother. But beyond the practical challenges, Letitia faced an emotional task that seemed almost impossible. She had to save Christmas. Saving Christmas. In the immediate aftermath of the massacre, Christmas was destroyed for the Józef Polski family. How could you celebrate a holiday when that holiday had been the setting for such horror? How could you see Santa Claus as a symbol of joy when the last time Santa came to your door, he shot your daughter in the face? For young Katrina, the trauma was particularly acute. She had been the first victim. She had opened the door with excitement and joy, had shouted, "Santa Claus, Santa Claus," and had been shot for her innocence. The physical wound would heal, but the psychological wound seemed permanent. But Letitia made a decision. Bruce Pardo would not be allowed to destroy Christmas for her children. He had taken enough. He had killed her family. He had shot her daughter. He would not be allowed to take Christmas itself. From her hospital bed, where she had taken Katrina after the shooting, Letitia called friends and asked them to make sure gifts were placed under the Christmas tree at home. Her children would have a Christmas. They would wake up on December 25th and find presents. They would experience some joy, even in the midst of horror. And Letitia told Katrina and her other daughter something crucial. That wasn't the real Santa. Santa is good. Santa brings joy. What happened to us was because of one bad man, not because of Santa Claus. It was a simple explanation, but it was essential. Letitia was working to separate the symbol of Christmas from the person of Bruce Pardo. She was teaching her children that evil can wear any costume, can appear in any form, but that doesn't make the symbol itself evil. Over the years that followed, Letitia worked tirelessly to maintain the family's Christmas traditions. She learned to make her mother's pozole, even though Alicia was no longer there to teach her the recipe. It took trial and error, but eventually she mastered it. Serving that pozole at Christmas dinner became a way of keeping her mother's memory alive, of maintaining a connection to the family traditions that had been so important to the Ortegas. The remaining family members continued to meet for Christmas dinners. They exchanged gifts, they shared memories. The gatherings were smaller now and tinged with sadness, but they were still gatherings. They were still family. Everywhere you turn, there are memories of what we used to have, and then memories of that night. Letitia explained to reporters years later. You can't escape it. Christmas will always be there, and we continue to celebrate it. The healing journey. Healing from trauma of this magnitude takes years, perhaps a lifetime. For the survivors of the Covina Massacre, the healing process involved therapy, support from extended family and community, time, and a conscious decision to not let Bruce Pardo's evil define their lives. Katrina Yuzapolsky underwent surgery to remove bullet fragments and close the wound in her cheek. Physically, she recovered well. The scar remained, but it healed cleanly. Emotionally, the recovery took longer. As Katrina grew older, she became involved in advocacy work related to gun violence. In 2018, after the Parkland school shooting in Florida, where 17 people were killed, Katrina participated in student walkouts and protests. She wrote letters to survivors of other mass shootings, sharing her own experience and offering hope. "It'll be hard, but just have hope. Don't give up." Katrina would typically write in these letters. This message, coming from a young woman who had survived being shot in the face at age 8, carried particular weight. The family also found healing in reaching out to others who had experienced similar tragedies. When a Connecticut woman lost her 3 daughters and parents in a house fire, the Yuzapolsky family wrote her letters of support. When the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting occurred, they again reached out to offer comfort and solidarity. "We have to keep moving in our everyday moments," Letitia explained. "There are those moments we think we've been through the worst, so this cannot break us." This became the family's abiding message: survival, resilience, hope. They had been through the worst. They had lost almost everything. But they were still here, still together in some form, still choosing to live and love and celebrate, despite what had been done to them. In 2016, Letitia appeared on a program and shared her philosophy about Bruce Pardo and what he had done. "I can't do anything to change what happened. I can only focus on the future. This is what he's done. Enough. I'm not going to allow you to continue to consume us with your evilness." This rejection of victimhood, this refusal to let Pardo's actions define the rest of their lives, was perhaps the most powerful form of healing. Letitia and her family were choosing to honor the memory of their lost loved ones by living well, by maintaining traditions, by loving each other fiercely. A Christmas Day tradition. As the years passed, the family developed a new Christmas Day tradition. After their gathering and meal, after the gifts and the pozole and the shared memories, they would go to the cemetery. All 9 victims of the massacre are buried together. The family visits their graves on Christmas Day, bringing flowers, spending time in reflection, ensuring that Joseph and Alicia and James and Teresa and Charles and Sherry Lynn and Alicia Ortiz and Michael and Sylvia are not forgotten. It is a somber tradition, but an important one. It acknowledges that Christmas will never again be purely joyful for the Yuzapolsky family. The shadow of December 24, 2008 will always be present, but it also affirms that family continues even after death, that love persists, that memory matters. Part 8. The broader implications. The psychology of holiday violence. The Covina Christmas Massacre raised difficult questions about why some people commit acts of extreme violence during the holidays. Psychologists and criminal profilers who have studied the case offer several insights into the phenomenon of holiday-related crime. Dr. Deborah Sherman Coughlin, a criminal profiler, explained that people who commit violent acts during holidays are often consumed by feelings of rejection. Typically, they targeted their victims specifically, and their violence is a direct expression of their frustration, anger, hate, or rage toward that person, she said. These attackers are often fixated on the fantasy of holidays being synonymous with love, family, and fun. For someone like Bruce Pardo, who had lost his wife, his job, his dog, his financial security, and his sense of self-worth, the Christmas season would have been particularly painful. He would have been surrounded by messages about family togetherness, about joy and love, about gifts and celebration. These messages would have contrasted sharply with his own reality of isolation, failure, and loss. Additionally, Pardo knew that Sylvia would be with her family on Christmas Eve. The Ortega tradition was well known. He knew where she would be, when she would be there, and that she would be surrounded by everyone she loved. This made Christmas Eve the perfect time to strike if his goal was not just to kill Sylvia, but to destroy everything she valued. The choice of a Santa Claus costume added another psychological dimension. Santa represents everything good about Christmas: generosity, joy, innocence, magic. By dressing as Santa while committing murder, Pardo was perverting that symbol, taking something beloved and transforming it into something horrifying. This was psychological warfare as much as it was physical violence. Some experts suggest that Pardo may have seen himself as a dark judge figure, someone delivering punishment to those who had wronged him. In his twisted logic, he was not a murderer, but an executioner, someone administering justice for the crimes that had been committed against him. Domestic violence and divorce. The Covina Massacre is often discussed in the context of domestic violence and the dangers of bitter divorces. While Pardo had no criminal record and no documented history of physical abuse during his marriage to Sylvia, his actions after the divorce reveal a level of rage and desire for control that are consistent with domestic violence patterns. Experts on domestic violence note that the most dangerous time for victims is often after they leave an abusive relationship. The separation represents a loss of control for the abuser, and this can trigger extreme violence. In Pardo's case, the divorce represented not just the loss of his wife, but the loss of everything that had defined his identity and success. His response was to try to regain control through violence, to punish Sylvia and her family for the crime of leaving him. The case also highlights the limitations of the legal system in predicting and preventing such violence. Pardo had no criminal record. There were no restraining orders. By all legal measures, he was not a threat. Yet he planned and executed one of the worst family massacres in American history. This raises difficult questions about how to identify and help people before they commit such acts. How do you distinguish between someone who is struggling with a difficult divorce and someone who is planning mass murder? What warning signs should friends, family, attorneys, and law enforcement be looking for? And what interventions might have prevented what happened on December 24, 2008? There are no easy answers to these questions. Pardo was skilled at presenting a normal, pleasant facade, even while planning violence. His attorney found him cheerful days before the massacre. His friends expected him at church on Christmas Eve. If those closest to him saw no warning signs, how could the system have detected the danger? Gun control and access to weapons. The Covina Massacre reignited debates about gun control and the ease with which people can acquire arsenals of weapons. Bruce Pardo purchased at least 5 handguns in the weeks or months before the massacre, all apparently through legal channels. Because Pardo had no criminal record, there would have been no legal barrier to him purchasing firearms. Background checks would have come back clean. From a legal standpoint, he had every right to buy guns. But should someone be able to purchase 5 handguns in a short period without triggering some kind of investigation or intervention? Should there be additional scrutiny for bulk purchases? Should there be waiting periods that might give someone time to reconsider violent plans? These questions remain contentious and unresolved. Gun rights advocates argue that Pardo passed all existing legal requirements and that further restrictions would only burden law-abiding citizens without preventing determined criminals. Gun control advocates argue that the ease with which Pardo armed himself demonstrates the need for more comprehensive regulations and monitoring. What is clear is that the weapons Pardo acquired were used to kill 9 people and wound 3 others. Whether additional laws would have prevented him from obtaining those weapons or would have simply delayed him while he found other means remains a matter of debate. The symbol of Santa Claus. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Covina Massacre was Pardo's choice to dress as Santa Claus. This decision transformed the case from just another mass shooting into something that felt like a violation of childhood innocence and Christmas itself. In the years since the massacre, the image of the killer Santa has become embedded in popular culture and collective memory. The case has been referenced in films, television shows, songs, and articles. British punk rock singer-songwriter Polly Styrene recorded a song called Black Christmas in 2010 that referenced the massacre. The 2012 film Silent Night drew inspiration from the case. For children who were at the party that night or who heard about what happened, The image of Santa Claus was forever changed. Parents throughout Covina and beyond had to have difficult conversations with their children about what happened, trying to reassure them that Santa was still good while acknowledging the reality of what Bruce Pardo had done. The case serves as a reminder that evil can wear any disguise, can appear in any form, can violate any symbol we hold sacred. There is no costume, no holiday, no tradition that is immune from being perverted by someone determined to cause harm. Community resilience. Despite the horror of what happened, the community of Covina demonstrated remarkable resilience in the years following the massacre. The city came together to support the survivors, to heal, and to ensure that the Ortega family would be remembered for who they were, not just for how they died. 1 year after the massacre, in December 2009, Covina held its annual Christmas parade. The parade included a special tribute to the Ortega family. Joseph Ortega, son of Charles and Cherie, and Carlos Ortiz, father of Michael, rode in a yellow school bus decorated in honor of the victims. The bus featured angel wings and a huge orange ribbon. 9 orange balloons in the shape of stars were tied to the bus, each balloon bearing the name of one of the 9 victims. Custom car builder George Barris, creator of the Batmobile and the Munsters coach, served as Grand Marshal of the parade specifically to help Covina heal. "When I heard what happened to the wonderful family, I wanted to help," Barris said. The community's response demonstrated that while Bruce Pardo had committed an act of evil, he had not destroyed Covina's spirit or its commitment to Christmas and family. The city refused to let the massacre define them. Part 9. Justice and Closure. The absence of a trial. Because Bruce Pardo killed himself hours after committing the massacre, there was never a trial. There was no opportunity for the survivors to face him in court, to hear him explain his actions, to see him held accountable by a jury of his peers. This absence of formal justice is common in mass murder cases where the perpetrator commits suicide. It leaves survivors with unanswered questions and a sense that the legal system, which is supposed to provide closure and accountability, has been short-circuited. For the Józef Polski family and the other survivors, there was no opportunity to give victim impact statements, to tell a court how Pardo's actions had affected their lives. There was no sentencing phase where they could advocate for maximum punishment. There was no prison term to mark time passing, no possibility of parole hearings where they could ensure Pardo remained incarcerated. Instead, there was just the knowledge that Pardo was dead, that he had killed himself to avoid facing the consequences of what he had done. Some survivors found solace in this. At least he was gone. At least he could never hurt anyone else. But others struggled with the lack of formal accountability, the feeling that Pardo had taken the easy way out, that he had escaped justice by pulling a trigger. Civil litigation? While there could be no criminal trial, there were civil, legal matters to resolve. The question of Pardo's estate, his assets, and who would be responsible for any financial compensation to the victims' families had to be addressed. Pardo's house in Montrose, the property he had fought to keep in the divorce settlement, became part of his estate. But with the mortgage payments far exceeding the equity, and with no one to maintain the property, the house was not worth much. There were life insurance policies to investigate, assets to liquidate, debts to settle. Attorneys representing the victims' families worked to ensure that any money that could be recovered would go to the survivors and to the children who had been orphaned. But no amount of money could compensate for what had been lost. 9 lives, a family's tradition, the innocence of children, the sense of safety that had defined Covina. These things had no price tag, could not be restored through litigation. The investigative report, the Covina Police Department, working with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, and other agencies, compiled a comprehensive investigative report on the massacre. The report detailed Pardo's planning, his weapons acquisition, the construction of the flamethrower, the escape plan, the events of December 24th, and the aftermath. The report confirmed what investigators had suspected. This was a meticulously planned attack, driven by revenge against Sylvia and her family. Pardo had spent significant time and effort preparing. He had acquired weapons legally. He had constructed a sophisticated incendiary device. He had developed an escape plan that might have worked if not for the explosion that burned him. The report also noted the many challenges in the investigation. Bodies burned beyond recognition. A crime scene largely destroyed by fire. A perpetrator who left no manifesto or detailed explanation. Witnesses traumatized and struggling to remember details accurately. But the report established a clear timeline and a clear motive. Bruce Pardo, bitter over his divorce and the losses he had suffered, had decided to punish Sylvia by destroying her and her entire family on Christmas Eve, the night when the family was most together and most vulnerable, preventing future tragedies. In the aftermath of the Covina Massacre, law enforcement agencies, mental health professionals, and policymakers attempted to extract lessons that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. Some recommendations focused on divorce proceedings. Should there be mandatory mental health evaluations for parties in contentious divorces? Should attorneys and judges be trained to recognize warning signs of potential violence? Should there be automatic restraining orders in any divorce where hostility reaches a certain level? Others focused on weapons acquisition. Should bulk purchases of firearms trigger investigations? Should there be longer waiting periods? Should temporary restrictions on gun purchases be imposed during divorce proceedings? Still others focused on community awareness. Should neighbors, co-workers, and friends be better educated about warning signs of domestic violence and potential mass violence? Should there be more accessible reporting mechanisms for people who observe concerning behavior? All of these ideas have merit, but all also face practical and legal challenges. How do you balance safety with privacy and civil liberties? How do you distinguish between normal divorce-related anger and actual homicidal intent? How do you intervene without violating people's rights? The Covina Massacre, like so many mass violence events, highlighted the difficulty of preventing such tragedies. Bruce Pardo did nothing illegal until he knocked on the Ortega family's door on Christmas Eve. By the time anyone knew he was dangerous, it was already too late. Conclusion. Remembering the victims, 16 years have passed since Christmas Eve 2008. For most of America, the Covina Christmas Massacre is a distant memory, a shocking news story from another time. But for the survivors, for the community of Covina, for anyone who lost someone that night, December 24th will never again be just the night before Christmas. Leticia Józef-Polski and her family continue to gather on Christmas. They share pozole made from Alicia's recipe. They exchange gifts, they remember, and they visit the cemetery where 9 people who should still be alive are buried together. Katrina Józef-Polski is now a young woman. The scar on her face has faded but not disappeared, much like the psychological scars she carries. She has used her experience to help others, to advocate for gun safety, to offer hope to survivors of violence. The house at 1129 Knollcrest Drive has been rebuilt. A new family lives there now, creating their own memories, celebrating their own holidays. But the neighbors remember, the community remembers, and we must remember too, not to obsess over the horror, not to glorify Bruce Pardo or to give him the infamy he may have sought, but to remember the victims, Joseph S. Ortega, 79, who built a family and a tradition that should have lasted generations longer. Alicia Sotomayor Ortega, 70, who loved Christmas and made her home a place of warmth and welcome. James Ortega, 52, who fought back even while wounded trying to save his family. Teresa Ortega, 52, who died at a celebration that should have been filled only with joy. Charles Ortega, 50, another hero who tried to stop the gunman despite being shot. Sherry Lynn Ortega, 45, a wife and mother taken too soon. Alicia Ortega. Ortiz, 46, a daughter and sister and mother whose life had value. Michael Andre Ortiz, 17, a young man whose future was stolen from him. Sylvia Ortega. Pardo, 43, who survived one husband's death and 2 marriages, who raised 3 children, who was described as kind and considerate, whose only crime was ending a marriage that wasn't working. These 9 people were more than victims of a mass shooting. They were human beings with dreams and hopes and loves. They were parents and children and siblings. They were part of a family that valued tradition and togetherness. They deserved to live. They deserved to celebrate Christmas. They deserved to grow old and watch their grandchildren grow. Bruce Pardo took all of that from them. He took it in a matter of minutes, dressed in a costume that was supposed to represent joy, but he did not take everything. He did not take the memory of who the Ortegas were. He did not take the resilience of the survivors. He did not take Letitia's determination to save Christmas for her children. He did not take the community's spirit or its commitment to supporting those who suffered. The Covina Christmas Massacre was an act of pure evil, a manifestation of rage and narcissism and cruelty that defies easy explanation. It reminds us that violence can erupt anywhere, can target anyone, can wear any disguise. But it also reminds us that people are resilient, that families can survive even catastrophic loss, that traditions can be maintained even when they're forever changed by tragedy, and that choosing hope and life in the face of death is the most powerful form of defiance against evil. As we close this examination of the Covina Christmas Massacre, let us honor the memory of the 9 people who died by living well ourselves, by cherishing our families, by making the most of our time together, and by refusing to let fear and anger define who we are. May Joseph, Alicia, James, Teresa, Charles, Sherry Lynn, Alicia, Michael, and Sylvia rest in peace. May the survivors continue to heal. And may we all remember that Christmas, despite what happened in Covina on December 24th, 2008, remains a time for love, for family, for hope, and for light in the darkness. Thank you for watching this investigation on Lore to Mystery. If you found this video informative, please like and subscribe. And please hug your loved ones a little tighter this holiday season. We never know how much time we have together. Epilogue: the current status. As of 2024, the Covina Christmas Massacre remains one of the worst family massacres in American history. No new information has emerged that would substantially change our understanding of what happened or why. Bruce Pardo's motivations died with him. The case continues to be studied by criminologists, psychologists, and law enforcement professionals as an example of extreme domestic violence and holiday-related mass murder. It appears in textbooks, in training materials, in academic papers analyzing the psychology of familicide. For the survivors, life continues. Letitia Józef-Polski remains committed to honoring her family's memory while building a future for her children and the other young people affected by the tragedy. She gives occasional interviews, sharing her story and her message of resilience. The Covina Police Department has never forgotten the case. The 10 detectives who worked the investigation all remained with the department for years, carrying the memory of that Christmas Eve with them. For a small police force in a quiet community, the Covina Massacre represented a level of horror they had never anticipated facing. And every year, on December 24th, as families across America gathered to celebrate Christmas Eve, somewhere in Covina, people pause to remember what happened on Knollcrest Drive in 2008. They light candles, they say prayers, they visit graves, because the best way to defeat evil is to refuse to forget those it tried to erase, to remember their names, to honor their lives, to carry forward their traditions. The Ortega family loved Christmas. Bruce Pardo tried to destroy that love, but he failed, because Christmas continues, family continues, love continues, and that, in the end, is the only victory that matters.